Point Homebrew Club, Krysten Thompson. I'm presenting on. Okay.
You will
Thanks,
be
Jeremy.
fantastic.
You just did it for me.
Yeah.
Well, I can introduce you. Krysten Thompson from Browns Point Homebrew Club, award-winning brewer, is ready to present on Tropical Stout category.
Future
Go ahead, Krysten.
award-winning. Future award-winning. All right. So I thought I would be my title slide with a little bit of tropics for you guys since it is so hot right now. So 16C Tropical Stout is what we're talking about. The history of it is pretty interesting because the exact beginning is not really known. It's kind of a, what's the word? It's a byproduct of colonization, basically. So as England came through the Caribbean, they brought their beers with them. And as they brought their beers, the locals started being like, hey, we can make this too. So some fun facts, as far back as 1780s, we have records of porters being shipped to India. And in fact, porters were shipped to India just as much as IPAs. So it's not just an IPA game back then. Porters were still really popular for overseas travel. 1801, we have Guinness as being on record with their West Indies porter. And they were sending that to Barbados, Trinidad, all those lovely things. And really, basically what happened was it started as a foreign extra stout, right? A 16D, and then slowly evolved as the English stayed put into this tropical stout category. One cool thing is that it can be stored for up to 9 months or more if you keep it at proper cellar temperatures. A couple things on the style guidelines for you. I kind of abbreviated it because I didn't want to have to put all that text on here. So aroma, moderate to high sweetness and fruitness, moderate to high roasted grain. It can have chocolate or coffee notes to it, which I think is interesting. The styles that I like the most have that molasses characteristic to it, as well as there can be licorice, dried fruit, and or vinous characteristics. I find the vinous characteristics more in the higher alcohols. And then little to no hops in the aroma. Your appearance is going to be very deep brown to black, preferably opaque, but if it's not, the clarity should be there. Depends on the color as well. The darker it is, the less you're going to be able to see that clarity, right? Just like other stouts, should have a large tan to brown head. The flavor is really interesting. It's going to be quite sweet with smooth dark grain flavors and restrained bitterness. Roast character is moderated by the sweet finish, and then it can have a sweet dark rum-like quality, which is what I like in it. Moderate to high fruit esters, little to no hop flavor, and then medium to low to no diacetyl. So not a horrible thing if that pops up in there. So I thought this would be a good little slide for you guys to see a little comparison, because really when you look at the stats, they're pretty much the same. It's all, except the foreign extra stout is just slightly higher on the IBUs. So the left-hand side is your 16C, your tropical stout. Tastes like a scaled up sweet stout with higher fruitiness. Shocking, it has less hops than an American stout. Big surprise. And then surprisingly, it typically uses a warm fermenting lager yeast. And that's where you get a little bit of that clarity and that storage factor as well. The foreign extra stout is going to be more akin to that Irish extra stout, but with more alcohol. And then going to have similar gravity, as you can see, but it's going to finish a lot drier and then have higher bitterness and less esters than the tropical. Am I going too fast?
No, you're fine.
Okay. So one of the big things I wanted to talk about with this style is sugar adjuncts, because that is a very common ingredient in here, which is what gives you that local island flair. Because if you want to get that gravity up to get that higher ABV, you need to add sugar because there's not a whole lot of grains in the tropics, right? So some fun stats that I found, 1 pound of sugar adds 1.0094 to your original gravity. So if you're a recipe builder, that's a good thing to know. In this recipe, they recommend, and this is all from Radical Brewing by Randy Mosher. He recommends keeping it at that 5 to 15% of your fermentables. Top limit really is 20. After that, it starts getting really cloying and hard to get attenuated. So if you're building recipes, just factor that into your original gravity calculations for your grain bill. And you're going to add it to the boils, not to the mash tuns, of course. So 2 sugars that I would recommend. The first one is your Demerara, Turbinado, or Barbados sugars. Those are all going to be granulated type sugars that come from sugar cane. And as you go from Demerara to Barbados, you get the darker color, which means more of that molasses character in it. Those are going to be pretty easy to find if you have a good Asian or Latin American market. It's very common. There's also a few other names out there as well for similar products. Molasses can also be a fermentable for you. Randy also has a quote saying that George Washington made a beer using only molasses and no malt, which I thought would be interesting. The big part with molasses, just like the sugars, is understanding your color. The darker you go, so black strap, you have to worry about being astringent just because it is so dark. And then just as a fun fact for your recipe building, molasses averages 11.7 pounds per gallon, since we do normally sell it in liquid measurements, not in weight. So, of course, me being me, I had to put some suggested food pairings because that's what I like to talk about too when I'm talking about beer and wine. So with this sweet style stout, I definitely think rich, savory meals, but also it's tropical. It's supposed to be light and easy drinking at the same time. So you can do a good seared scallop or steamed oysters. It should pair pretty well with seafood. I really like to think of it with my spicy dishes, which I know spicy food can be really hard to pair alcohol with, especially wine. But that sweetness really cuts through those spices and those extra chilies and things. So that would be a great pairing. Cheese pairing, you want to go smooth and creamy. So any of your blues, good sharp cheddar, and then a good old classic brie, as long as it's nice and warm. You don't want it cold brie. And then if you want to do it for a dessert beer, pair it with your really hardcore chocolate desserts like flourless chocolate cake, molten cakes, things like that. Even a super rich brownie would be a good combination. And then it is best served at 50 to 55 degrees. And then to finish, I have 2 options for recipes. The first one Matt shared with me. It is the silver medal winner from the 2018 National Homebrew Competition. It was entered in British and Irish stouts, which I think is interesting. Although it did originate as one, it is a different style for sure. In looking at this, a couple things that stand out to me is the addition of chocolate malt and lactose. Lactose is a really interesting thing because it's not meant to be like a milk stout. It's meant to be more grain forward and still sweet, but not with that tanginess that lactose will give you. It also has cocoa nibs in it, so they're really going off of that cocoa chocolate flavor. And then a pretty standard direction for you on your mash and boil type thing. And then it has extract hops in it, so a little different. Next one I have is actually from Radical Brewing, and I thought it was an interesting. It's called his Black Ship Pirate Stout. So if you look at this one, it's a much different, much smaller grain bill. It's literally pale malt, Munich, black patent, and then blackstrap molasses, and that's it. And I think sometimes with our home brews, we kind of overthink things when it comes to our malts, and we're like, oh, we need this color, or we need this flavor. Let's add a little bit of this, a little bit of that. So what I like about this recipe is that it has kind of taken it back to some more basics and really focusing on your technique to just get those flavors versus having to have all these different specialty malts and things in there. So like I said, in this recipe, that molasses you add at the boil, because of course, if you put that in your mash, it's going to be bad news bears. And then what's interesting about this one is he does add some spice to it. So at the end of the boil, there's added coriander, allspice, and black pepper. And then right before bottling, zest of an orange or tangerine soaked in vodka. So I kind of like the idea of that, because if you think back to pirates and scurvy, and they always trying to figure out a way to get citrus, I think it's a cool combination there with your tropical stout. And that really is my presentation. That went a lot faster than I thought it would. To be honest, I have not brewed this myself, so I will open the floor if anyone else has brewed it and has any personal thoughts or questions.
So I'm wondering, in the comparison that you did between the two styles, it said there was something about one of them being more sweet or something, but they had the same finishing gravity.
Yeah, and I think part of that comes down to your attenuation, is what I'm guessing from it, and then your yeast selection. That's the only thing I can think of, because they really are the same on your OG and your finishing gravity. The other thing, though, is that the Foreign Extra Stout has almost double the IBUs. So it has more bittering units, which is going to mask some of that sweetness, which you're not going to get in the Tropical Stout. Or the Tropical Stout, you'll find the sweetness because it's not covered by the hop bitterness.
Okay.
If you brew a foreign export stout and then it comes out not as hoppy as you wanted, it could be a tropical stout.
Yeah, if it's a little under attenuated, maybe, if it's not too cloying.
Yeah. Didn't know.
Just put some orange peel in the
In the keg.
Has anyone brewed this style yet? Ooh, fun. Me and Emma are going to be the first.
I think it's an exciting style to brew because you don't have these preconceived notions when you're at the judging table of what it's supposed to taste like. So then you're forced to go read the guidelines, and those styles are styles that you can be really successful at that judging table. And we put Chuck's recipe in today. He's with the Oregon Brew Crew. He's won second place Oregon Homebrewer of the Year, maybe 5-6 years in a row. And I think that if they had the same scoring format as we do in Washington State, he'd be hands down winner time and time again. His Tropical Stout also won at the JBLM last year. He's won Best of Show at JBLM more than 5 times. And with that beer in his wee heavy. So that's why I wanted to make sure we were able to see that recipe. I was excited when they posted the second place winning recipe, because up until that year, they only posted the first place recipe. So I think that's a good place to start. And, you know, he does use the 2 different ale yeasts instead of lager yeast, which I thought was very interesting. So I recommend starting off with that and maybe taking your own twist on it with your brew system and your experiences and everything you know, and taking that route. I mean, I think it's a beer that not only in our competition, but in other competitions, that if it's made well, it can easily win because people aren't walking into it saying, well, this is what a Marzin's supposed to taste like,
I brewed a foreign extra stout. Well, I wanted it to be a foreign extra, but I didn't think it quite met the guidelines, so I submitted it into a competition as a tropical, and I got pretty decent score. I think I probably scored in the low 30s or so, but they kind of knocked me a little bit for not having – this is over a year ago, so I'm just trying to remember, but they kind of knocked me a little bit for not having more of the tropical flavor, because I used probably traditional English hops as opposed to, kind of fruitier American type hops that I think would have been more appropriate.
Well, and actually the English hops are good because it is it started as an English beer.
Mm-hmm.
The trick is just getting that level of sweetness.
Okay.
So that
I've seen some recipes that say, hey, add some Citra in there or something like, so I don't know if that's deemed appropriate or not.
I definitely think Citra could be a good addition. I mean, look at adding orange zest at the end on that last recipe from Randy. I think that could help. It's really about getting that molasses and that rum-like character. I think that is the trick to really getting a tropical stout.
Does anyone know anyone locally who brews a tropical stout?
Diamond Knot.
Yeah, one of my favorites is Diamond Knot.
Okay.
It's amazing.
Yeah, it's really, really good. I know Emma has been drinking it every time we've been to Crift.
I've had it. Yeah, I've had that a couple of times. I've only seen it a few times, but I have picked it up. It's been a while though. What's that?
Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I'm not a big fan of what tropical stout is described as, but it's probably my favorite. I love stouts. It's my favorite summer stout.
You love it when it all comes together.
Yeah, it's I love it.
How about our certified judges? Do you guys have any thoughts or anything on this style?
Yes. Go ahead, John.
I would also agree with what others have said about seeking out the Diamond Knot example. It's a pretty good example of the beer. The other thing I was going to point out is in the second recipe that you shared. Great presentation, by the way. Absolutely solid. Look at the starting gravity and the finishing gravity, and you'll see where some of that sweetness is coming from. The beer tends to start a little higher and then finish a lot higher. And so you get a 7% beer, but I mean, you started 1.090. You're going to leave some residual sweetness behind. And the key is figuring out how much that needs to be to where you have a stout and it's a really good drinkable stout, but has a little of that sweetness that you want without being cloying. That's all I'm going to add.
And when they say that there should be some fruitiness in there, is that supposed to be from the yeast esters? Maybe like from warm fermenting a lager yeast, are they expecting more fruity esters to come through?
I would agree.
Yes. And also, remember when they say warm fermenting a lager yeast, they don't mean like Saison warm. They mean like in the 60s instead of in the 50s. So if you're going to take a lager yeast and warm ferment it to make this beer, you still need temperature control. Don't get too carried away or you're going to make racing fuel. Fuel for my...
Well, I think that's why when people are judging this blindly, right, we're not knowing the style, that ale, what was it, darkness, and what else did he use in there? A blend of yeast?
It was Joystick, which is the Pac-Man strain.
Yeah, the Rogue ale yeast, that he's found success with that, getting that similar profile that is described in the guidelines.
I think another way, like Chris was talking about, is just boosting that fruitiness with some New World hops, you know. So I would agree with that as well. Adding that as kind of a boost there. So
what a great example of that was Tim's Pro-Am, his is Black IPA, which was fantastic with the Citra in it. Was just, I never had a dark beer with Citra that I found just phenomenal. I don't know if anyone made it out to Acorn when that was on there, but it is their highest rated beer, and they killed it. I mean, they made a really good beer with that.
All right, cool. I'm going to stop recording now and see.
Cheers. Good job.